real-life stories on ITV.
With your late headlines now this Thursday night, it's the ITV News at 10.
After 45 days which cratered the economy and rocked politics, Liz Truss resigns, the shortest-serving Prime Minister in history.
I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him.
It triggers yet another leadership election to choose our 5th PM in 6 years, and guess who could be on the list?
The message loud and clear from ordinary decent people of Peterborough, Conservative voters, was bring back Boris.
It's a contest due to be done in a week, and the party members get to vote, all prompting a chorus from the opposition.
What a mess. Complete chaos. And it's not just, a soap opera in the Tory party. They've inflicted huge damage on our economy.
Well, the contenders have to get the support of 100 MPs, which should narrow the field fast. So Penny Mordaunt, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, who are the likely runners? We'll get all the analysis from Robert and our team at Westminster, and all the reaction to yet another day of political history. The cost of living crisis, the gravest of backdrops. So what do voters think?
They're thinking about themselves and, what's best for them and what's best for their party rather than what's best for us.
It's a giant clown show over there.
A global laughingstock, what the world and its leaders are making of the chaos. In other news, failing to report child sex abuse should be a crime, the key finding of a major inquiry. And something like justice at last for Harry Dunn. American Ansa Koulis pleads guilty to his death by careless driving.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham in Downing Street.
Well, good evening, and here we go again. Another Prime Minister resigns, a new leadership campaign begins, and an all-too-familiar face is back in the reckoning. Yes, Boris Johnson is among the early names in the frame for what would be a barely believable return here to Downing Street after Liz Truss said she could not deliver on her mandate. A few leaves had started to fall in Downing Street when she first marched through the black door behind us as Prime Minister. Most of them are still on the trees as her stormy season in the spotlight ends. After less than 6 weeks in power, she's going. The succession will be more of a scramble this time, and 100 backers are needed for a candidate to go through. Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt are among them. A winner by a week tomorrow at the latest. Opposition parties say there must be a general election. Labour's Sir Keir Starmer said this isn't just a soap opera at the top of the Conservative Party.
At 1:30 today, the Prime Minister came out to make history, the wrong kind for her, because she was about to set the record for being the shortest-serving Prime Minister in history. She began by talking about how she'd persuaded Tory members to back her in the summer.
We set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
Liz Truss said that a couple of hours earlier she'd met with the Tory MP's shop steward, Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 1922 committee.
We've agreed that there will be a leadership election to be completed within the next week. This will ensure that we remain on a path to deliver our fiscal plans and maintain our country's economic stability and national security. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.
And here was Sir Graham saying how important it is that uncertainty about who runs the UK doesn't run beyond a week.
I think we're deeply conscious of the imperative in the national interest of resolving this clearly and quickly.
Her 45 days have been a study in chaos. First, there was Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget.
We're at the beginning of a new era.
That sent the pound and government bonds tumbling and interest rates soaring. Then there was the mother of all U-turns just 6 days ago, with Kwarteng replaced by Hunt and £32 billion of tax cuts reversed.
It was right, in the national interest, that I made the decisions I've made today to restore that economic stability.
Finally, as the new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt prepared to push up other taxes and cut public spending, yesterday we had the chaos of a Home Secretary being sacked and utter chaos in the Commons over a fracking vote.
I saw members being physically manhandled into another lobby.
What a mess. Complete chaos. And it's not just, a soap opera in the Tory party. They've inflicted huge damage on our economy and on our reputation as a country, and the public are paying through higher prices and mortgages.
For once, Labour and the SNP agree on what must come next.
What needs to happen now? Well, on a UK level, there must be a general election. It is a democratic necessity.
And this former Cabinet Minister spoke for most Tory MPs.
I feel sorry for the Prime Minister. I think she's been unlucky as well as having made some mistakes. But the truth is, we had to reset.
So who'll be Britain's next Prime Minister? This former Chancellor and runner-up over the summer, Rishi Sunak, has a strong claim because he warned Tory MPs that Liz Truss's tax-cutting plans would lead to disaster. And this current leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, is regarded by many as the unity candidate. But of course, where there's a political opening, this recent Prime Minister makes a noise. On holiday in the West Indies, he's said to be thinking of joining the contest.
The message loud and clear from ordinary decent people of Peterborough, Conservative voters, was bring back Boris.
Though many MPs think Boris Johnson will struggle to get the 100 initial backers that are required. After the deluge, who'll be clearing up? Well, we'll know the runners and riders by 2 o'clock on Monday. Not long to wait. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Well, today's resignation has triggered the second Conservative leadership election in 4 months, and it'll be a quick-fire contest this time, as we were just hearing. Nominations are open now, but by 2 p.m. on Monday, each candidate will need at least 100 nominations from MPs. With 357 Tory MPs, that means there can only be a maximum of 3 candidates. And if there is only one candidate with 100 supporters on Monday, they are automatically selected as Prime Minister. If not, then, in a brief series of votes, MPs show who is their favoured candidate. And if no one drops out and 2 remain in the race, there would then be a short window for ordinary party members to cast their votes online. Well, tonight, these are said to be the most likely runners: Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Ben Wallace, and yes, Boris Johnson. But whatever happens, the new Prime Minister will be decided by next Friday at the very latest. No time to waste. The various backbench factions are already forming.
The end of another long, hectic, chaotic day in Westminster, lending itself to a joke about Conservative Prime Ministers and buses. They waited 13 years and then 4 came along. Tonight, Conservative MPs, some still inside Parliament, but many headed to their constituencies, are considering who will be number 5. It had become clear first thing that a trickle of dissent from Tory MPs had turned into a flood.
I have submitted a letter to Sir Graham Brady.
Clearly things have to change.
It's been a very difficult 24 hours, and I think the Prime Minister is in a very tricky spot.
Very tricky, and soon Liz Truss was gone. After a speech lasting less than 2 minutes, the conversations among Conservative MPs turned. Usually Thursdays are quite quiet in Parliament, but right now it is buzzing, and all over this place Tory MPs are meeting, discussing who can lead their party. They want stability, and many of them would like to unite around one candidate.
I do think that we need somebody who can bring both wings of the party together.
Is this the whole party?
Yes.
Really going to agree on a top leadership team and on a top leadership person?
If we can't now, and whoever wins unite around them, well, the only alternative will be a general election. I think that will focus minds, given where the polling is at the moment.
Out of those runners and riders, one,
de facto 2 p.m.
Chancellor Jeremy Hunt quickly ruled himself out. But Penny Mordaunt certainly did not. When asked what's the point of government business right now, she said,
I am going to keep calm and carry on, and I would suggest everyone else do the same.
Rishi Sunak has been keeping calm and quiet. Many MPs want him to make a deal with Penny Mordaunt because they know some on the right don't like him. By the time Tory shop steward Sir Graham Brady emerged with party chair Jake Berry to set out the rules, there'd been mentions of Kemi Badenoch, Ben Wallace, Suella Braverman, but most of all...
Are you stitching up the rules here to keep Boris Johnson off the ballot?
We've fixed a high threshold, but a threshold that should be achievable by any serious candidate who has a realistic prospect of going through.
Now Tory MPs will spend the next few days in their constituencies.
I'm going to speak to my members. I'd like to be sure about who the candidates are, what their platforms are. Are they going to govern with integrity? Are they going to be compassionate Conservatives? Are they going to unify the party but also the country as well?
Unifying the party might be difficult. Tonight, one MP said he'd resign if Boris Johnson were to win again.
Well, Anushka joins us now from outside the Houses of Parliament. Quite the day indeed, Anushka. Now, they've set up this voting system. How likely is it that the vote goes to the Conservative Party members?
It's definitely possible that it doesn't. When Sir Graham and Jake Berry were speaking earlier, they kept saying if it goes to members. They know that loads of MPs don't want it to. They want a very quick process. In many ways, MPs have delayed ousting Liz Truss because they were trying to agree on a candidate. But yesterday it became too much. I had an MP describing pushing a no confidence letter under Sir Graham's door late at night. He was overwhelmed. Apparently he was picking up the phone to Downing Street when they called him for a meeting. Now, they have put in system in place for that week-long online vote of members. They insist that it is protected against security concerns, but many MPs would love to get this done in one day. On Monday, they kind of hope that the top two candidates will agree on this, but here is the problem. All of the candidates, as they come forward, want to be Prime Minister, so they may well not agree on that, and then we would have to go to that online vote.
OK, Anushka, thank you for taking us through all that. And Robert is with me here in Downing Street. So let's talk about Boris Johnson first. I mean, we were here in the summer with the podium out when he resigned here. He's walked off. Could he conceivably be walking back?
So it's quite clear he wants to be walking back. And there is a massive campaign among his fans in Parliament to get him back. The question is, can he reach that threshold of 100 MPs? And I've spoken to many senior members of the party, and they think he will struggle to get to 100. They think he will get to about 80. But, this is really quite important, Tory MPs are being emailed by local members, and lots of those members, we know that, we've polled them, they love Boris Johnson. And the interesting question is how much pressure they will put on individual MPs over the weekend to not vote for the candidate they might want to vote for, but actually back Boris Johnson. It is an extraordinary idea that literally just, a few months after he left here in abject humiliation, he could be back. I mean, I have to say, there are some people, when he left, said he backed Liz Truss as the weakest candidate because he thought she might fail and he might be able to come back. Now, I don't know whether I believe in cock-up or conspiracy, but I'm just relaying that some people think this is all some cunning plan.
OK, it's very easy to get caught up in all of this speculation at this very point, but it's also crucial to remember, of course, that we all talked about what a terrible in-tray Liz Truss had when she arrived in Downing Street. Whoever gets it next time has one that is a whole lot worse, and some of that is down to her.
No, totally. I mean, the main indictment of her is she knew there was a cost of living crisis. She knew that there were some really difficult problems associated with inflation. Rishi Sunak warned her that if she did those tax cuts, it would be an economic disaster. She went ahead with her tax cuts. She ignored official advice that was being given all around her. And lo and behold, what we had was a plummeting pound. More importantly, bond prices were falling, interest rates going through the roof. And so what she is bequeathing, because the interest bill for the government as a result of her actions is going up, is a situation for the new Prime Minister where taxes have to go up and public spending has to be cut. So even though the new Prime Minister is being chosen to try and shore up the popularity of the Tory party, it's going to be incredibly difficult given that the first actions of that Prime Minister are inevitably going to be extremely painful for the public and therefore unpopular.
OK, Robert, for the moment. We'll talk to you again later. Thank you very much indeed for that. Well, there is some soul-searching now for Conservative MPs on who to choose. As Robert was just saying, for those with small majorities, typically in red wall seats, one factor will be who will give them the best chance or any chance of hanging on to their seats. We've been finding out in one of them, Bolton North East, what the events of today and indeed the past 3 weeks have done to those chances from the people, of course, who really matter, the voters.
Tidying up after the kids have gone to bed. Tonight, though, Brenda LaVeyes is hoping the Conservatives will clear up their mess too. 200 miles from the Westminster bubble, for her, the rising costs of living means a struggle to make ends meet, one she thinks MPs don't understand.
They're thinking about themselves and, you know, what's best for them and what's best for their party rather than what's best for us. I need my eyes testing. I can't afford to go and get that done. And the children don't understand why mum and dad can't give them the things that they want anymore. It's got to the point where being angered so much and being frustrated so much that it's got to the point where I'm not interested anymore.
This seat is one of the country's most marginal. Labour took it in 1997 and held it for 22 years. But in 2019, the voters here went for Boris Johnson and his levelling up agenda. 3 years later, many still believe in him.
Who do you think should be the next Prime Minister?
So, Boris Johnson. I just feel that there's unfinished business.
He's got personality, hasn't he?
So do you think his personality is more important than everything that happened with Partygate?
Yeah, definitely.
Why?
Why?
Because Did Partygate bother you?
Not really, no.
Who do you think should be the next Prime Minister?
Keir Starmer.
Why do you think he should be the next Prime Minister?
Labour hasn't really had they've not been in for a while, and I genuinely think because the Conservative Party is all over the place at the moment. It needs a try in this crisis.
But in other traditionally marginal seats like here in Northampton South, there's support for a different candidate.
I think they are capable eventually of sorting it if we get the right person in. Rishi Sunak.
For Brenda, though, all she hopes for is stability, for the government to focus on what people really need help with as they face a difficult winter ahead. Sangeeta Lal, News at 10, Bolton.
Well, the phrase international laughing stock has been bandied about in relation to the implosion of the government even before Liz Truss's resignation. Around the world, she made more TV headlines today than at any time during her tenure in Downing Street. But international leaders were being pretty generous. Their biggest wish of both President Biden and President Macron of France was some stability in the UK.
Breaking across the pond, a political earthquake.
The United States is no stranger to political turmoil, but the state of British politics has left even the Americans agog.
Conservative Prime Minister Liz Truss has quit.
After just 6 weeks on the job, it's the shortest tenure in history.
Madam Prime Minister...
Liz Truss met with President Biden just 2 weeks into her premiership.
I look forward to working closely with you. You're our closest ally in the world.
However, soon he was aghast at her view of trickle-down economics, breaking political protocol to criticise another leader.
I disagreed with the policy, but that's up to Great Britain to make that judgment, not me.
Today, at a time when world leaders are seeking stability and unity, this from the President.
She was a good partner on Russia and Ukraine, and the British are going to solve their problems.
Very nice to see you again.
Building strong allegiances with allies should be a leader's priority. Yet that was not Truss's starting point.
President Macron, friend or foe?
The jury's out. But if I become Prime Minister, I'll judge him on deeds, not words.
Today, President Macron offered his own words on her departure. Describing France as a friend of the British people, he said the country needed to rediscover political stability. Unsurprisingly, in Russia, where Truss had a testy visit as Foreign Secretary, she was condemned as the most disgraceful Prime Minister Britain had ever known. And from a former president, this tweet. mocking that she lasted a shorter time than the lettuce featured in a British newspaper campaign to see who would wither first amid the chaos of her premiership. Such chaos and ridicule has former diplomats in despair.
People around the world want to do business with the UK. They don't want to do business with a chaotic government system. So reputationally, I think this has been, I'm afraid, very damaging.
If the UK is to be a respected global player in the future, its next Prime Minister must offer leadership and longevity. Emma Murphy, News at 10 in the United States.
So that was some reaction from around the world. How did the markets react? Well, Joel is at the Bank of England. And Joel, of course, it was the money markets that broke Liz Truss after that mini budget nearly 4 weeks ago. What have they made of her departure?
Pretty calm, pretty relaxed, pretty positive. No surprise, really, in a sense. The markets, Julie, at the end of the day, came to view Liz Truss as high risk. What we saw during the course of the last week is the more her grip on power loosened, the cheaper it became for the government and everyone else to borrow money. Completely bonkers, really, when you think about it. Liz Truss was elected, of course, with a very simple plan: cut taxes, avoid a recession, revive the economy. Her mini budget 4 weeks ago was her undoing, out-tumbled all those tax pledges that she made during her campaign, plus a few more for good measure, and no clue whatsoever about how they would be financed. Within days, the Chancellor was promising more of the same. The bond market blew out and brought both of them down. Prime ministers in the past have been humiliated economically, if you like. Think of the IMF bailout and Black Wednesday. This humiliation was totally self-inflicted, though. I think it's unimaginable that any future government will make large, unfunded giveaways without the scrutiny of the independent Office of Budget Responsibility. Whoever is the next Prime Minister, though, walks into an absolute furnace. Inflation is burning red hot. The Bank of England behind me is expected to raise interest rates further. Living standards are falling and we sit on the cusp of recession.
Okay, Joel, thank you very much indeed. Well, to other news now, and the result of 7 years of distressing evidence to try to end the blight of child sexual abuse that has destroyed so many lives for so long was at last published today. The independent inquiry was into 15 separate scandals in England and Wales involving Parliament, the Church, Rochdale, Jimmy Savile and more. Its main recommendation: it should be a criminal offence for anyone working with children in a position of trust not to report any sexual abuse they become aware of.
Horrifying and deeply disturbing. Institutions prioritise their reputations over the protection of children, an epidemic that leaves tens of thousands of victims in its poisonous wake. Just some of the findings of a 7-year-long inquiry set up after a series of child sex abuse scandals which heard from more than 7,000 victims.
It was a very sadistic, harsh regime for boys as young as 10.
Paul was abused at Ford Park School in Devon in the 1970s and has lived with the trauma ever since.
I became an alcoholic in my younger years and I stayed like that for 25 years. I was unable to hold jobs down, relationships always went out the window. And then the more I spoke, the easier it became.
The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse was set up in 2015 after scandals like Jimmy Savile and claims of an establishment cover-up. It heard evidence from church leaders, senior police officers and government ministers, producing 2.5 million pages of evidence. In its final report, it recommends a new law so people working in positions of trust who fail to report child sex abuse can be prosecuted, a scheme for compensating victims and survivors, and the creation of a child protection authority in England and in Wales. The chair of the inquiry wants the government to make this an absolute priority.
There's a lot going on at Westminster at the moment. What is your message to the government to ensure they take note, they listen to this?
We would expect any government to take this seriously. What can be more important than the future of children and their protection?
Are organisations still failing to protect children?
Yes, they are.
I took it to the very top of the church, asking for help. He was still left in a position of trust with children.
Joanne was abused as a child by someone in a Catholic church.
The act of abuse may be historic, but it's a life sentence. The effects, it's past, present, future. It's been humiliating, violating, intrusive, distressing, traumatic, goes on and on. We've done this so that others have it easier, that future children are protected, that future children are believed.
The government is promising the start of a new chapter. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
It's now been revealed that last month, during heightened tension over the war in Ukraine, a Russian plane released a missile near an unarmed RAF surveillance plane on patrol over the Black Sea. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told MPs it was potentially dangerous and that it happened in international airspace. It came from a Russian fighter jet like this one. He said Russia blamed a technical malfunction for the incident. Now for the mother of Harry Dunn, who was knocked off his motorbike and killed 3 years ago. Today marked the fulfilment of a promise to get justice for him made on the day he died. An American woman who was driving on the wrong side of the road outside an RAF base finally admitted to a British court that she had caused Harry's death by careless driving. Ansa Koulis appeared on a video link from the United States. Now Harry's parents want her to return to Britain in person for her sentencing. It would show she was truly sorry, they said.
3 years after the loss of their beloved son Harry, his parents stood outside the Old Bailey, having kept their promise to him and seen the person who caused his death admit to her crime to a British court.
Never broken a promise to my kids, and I wasn't going to start in the last 3 years. So for me, this can start to heal a little bit now. So yeah, I'm good. I'm good with it.
Harry was 19 years old and riding his motorcycle when he died after a collision with a car that was being driven on the wrong side of the road near an RAF base in Northamptonshire, used by the American military. Ansa Koulis, filmed here outside her home in the United States, was the driver of that car. The US government asserted diplomatic immunity on her behalf in the days after the crash, and she left the UK to go home. She is still there. An extradition request made by the British government was rejected by the Americans. She agreed to face charges only if she could do so via video link, and that's how she entered her plea today.
The limits of British justice were frankly expressed by the judge after the guilty plea had been made. Ansa Koulis is a convicted offender, she said. But she went on, it is agreed that any sentence I impose is likely to be unenforceable.
Due to the diplomatic protection she enjoys, Ansa Koulis can't be made to attend in person her sentencing next month, though Harry's parents would appreciate it if she did as a sign of her remorse.
Anne will do what Anne wants to do. Whether she comes, I don't know, but at least she knows how we feel about that.
This family is clearly satisfied that justice has been done, but it happened only because of the defendant's consent, and the British legal system has never seen anything quite like it. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Well, that's back to our main story of the day. And all political careers, the saying goes, end in failure, because that is the nature of politics. Well, Liz Truss's political life in Number 10 has been shorter and more of a failure than almost any before. In the 45 days since she walked through the door for the first time, there have been more U-turns than a series of Top Gear. And perhaps with her conversion from the Lib Dems to the Conservatives and Remain to Brexit, that was perhaps always on the cards.
She only became Prime Minister on the 6th of September.
I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government.
And despite being the shortest-serving Prime Minister in British history, she still clocked up an impressive array of policy U-turns. It seems she was always prepared to change her mind. As a young Liberal Democrat, she opposed the monarchy.
Everybody in Britain should have the chance to be a somebody. But only one family can provide the head of state.
After becoming a Conservative and getting elected, she had a series of ministerial jobs, best known for her strident views on cheese.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Boris Johnson made her Foreign Secretary, which allowed her to pose for more than one photograph reminiscent of Margaret Thatcher. She said each one was a coincidence. While others resigned over Johnson's behaviour, Truss stayed in post, putting her in a strong position ahead of the leadership race. Her economic policies exasperated her main opponent, Rishi Sunak.
It is. Liz, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. But borrowing your way out of inflation isn't a plan, it's a fairy tale.
But the Tory party membership believed it, and Truss was elected leader.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy.
4 weeks ago came the disastrous mini-budget with its unfunded tax cuts.
But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether.
There was already huge unease at her first conference as leader.
So you won't change your mind on the 45p rate?
No.
A few hours later, she did change her mind, dropping the plan.
I have 3 priorities for our economy: growth, growth and growth.
But the turmoil in the financial markets continued. 10 days later, Truss sacked her Chancellor, U-turned on a pledge not to raise corporation tax, and held a short and very painful press conference.
It is clear that parts of our mini-budget went further and faster than markets were expecting.
Trying to shore up her crumbling authority, she asked Jeremy Hunt to be her Chancellor. He ditched most of the mini-budget, leaving her with no credibility. At Prime Minister's questions, she insisted she wasn't going anywhere.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
But then yesterday she lost another minister, sacking the Home Secretary. And there were ugly scenes in the voting lobbies as she tried to railroad through a vote on fracking. Overnight, the trickle of confidence letters had suddenly become a flood, MPs deciding enough was enough. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
So what are the headline writers making of Liz Truss's departure from Downing Street? Let's have a look at tomorrow's front pages. The Guardian calls it the bitter end for Ms Truss after she bowed to the inevitable. The Telegraph, Boris Johnson's former paper, of course, quotes him as telling Tories that he can save the party from a wipeout at the next election. The Sun has a similar theme, saying Mr Johnson is considering what the paper calls the mother of all political comebacks. The Mirror echoes demands for a general election. Subtle front page there, not a Conservative Party leadership election. So does the Daily Record. It says the government no longer has a mandate. And the Financial Times points out that Liz Truss's resignation could affect when the Chancellor announces his plans on how to fill the government's £40 billion black hole. So a quick cast through the papers there. I mean, there's 2 key lines there. One, Boris Johnson, which we've talked about, Robert, but also that question that some are now calling for that general election. There's no mechanism for that, is there, visible? And what we're getting is this super quick leadership contest.
I mean, look, we are living in extraordinary times. We've never before had 3 prime ministers in the course of a parliament. Inevitably, therefore, the opposition parties say this is not democracy. They want a general election. But you know, let's be absolutely clear. This is a parliamentary system. We don't have a presidential system. The Conservative Party is completely within its rights to replace the person who lives there. And the only route to a general election is if they are stupid enough to choose somebody who splits their party. I mean, there's talk tonight, for example, of some MPs quitting. If Boris Johnson were to go back there, such is the way that he divides opinion within his own party. So what I am focusing on literally night and day at the moment is, can they find a candidate in just the next couple of days who can heal these extraordinary wounds that are they desperately damage their party, but let's be clear, because of the lack of confidence in their perceived competence, they're damaging the country.
Yeah, it is quite the feat, Robert. Thank you very much indeed. So, if Liz Truss and husband Hugh are like most people who've recently moved home, they'll barely have had time to empty the packing cases by now, let alone change that wallpaper. Who knows, the next resident might find the decor inside number 10 rather familiar and just to his taste. Liz Truss arrived here of course, channeling her inner Margaret Thatcher, the longest-serving Conservative Prime Minister of modern times. She leaves as the shortest-serving of all time. In Liz we trust was her campaign slogan. That rings pretty hollow tonight. It isn't just trust in her that has gone as MPs arrive back in their constituencies. Restoring trust in their party will be a big ask from all of us. Good night.
I've not been on for